A dying Mustang horse was bought by a little girl. But the ending will astonish everyone. The Mustang horse was nothing but skin and bones, with hollow eyes and a long scar behind his ear, deemed worthless, just waiting to be put down. But then, a 12-year-old girl with a heart far too big for her age raised her hand in the middle of a cold auction and said, "I want that horse." No one could have imagined that this seemingly naive gesture would spark an extraordinary journey, one filled with love, perseverance, and a touch of magic that would go on to transform an entire community and make the world take a second look at the value of what others had thrown away. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe. Callie Morgan was 12 years old, and for as long as she could remember, she had lived on the old wooden ranch at the edge of Sagebrush Valley. The land spread wide behind the house, merging into rolling hills and sparse grass, with a horizon that seemed to stretch on forever. Before he passed, her father, Daniel Morgan, used to take her out into the open fields at sunrise. She would cling to the fence rail, watching as he guided Mustangs through gentle circles, speaking in a tone so calm it was almost a lullaby. Now, nearly 2 years after his sudden stroke, those days felt more like distant dream. The house showed signs of a family once devoted to caring for horses. Tattered photos hung in the hallways, Daniel standing next to a spirited Mustang. Grinning proudly, young Callie perched on a wooden fence, no older than 5, gazing up at her father as though he were a hero. In many ways he had been. Daniel Morgan was locally renowned for his non-violent Mustang therapy, a unique approach that allowed him to calm even the wildest of horses, guiding them into becoming valuable companions, especially for children in distress. He had turned the ranch into a small but bustling center of healing for both horses and kids who needed them. But when Daniel died suddenly from a stroke, the life and warmth of the ranch seemed to vanish overnight. The old wooden stables, once a central hub of activity, fell silent. Dust gathered on the iron hooks, and the old saddles and bridles hung as ghostly reminders of a once thriving practice. It wasn't just the ranch that had gone quiet. Callie, who had idolized her father, grew withdrawn. She would often slip outside after dinner, letting the cooler evening air wash over her while she stared at the unused stable doors. Laura Morgan, Callie's mother, did her best to keep them afloat. Bills piled up. The once modest savings began draining away. Taking on the role of a veterinary assistant at the valley's only animal clinic, she worked late into the night. Though she loved Callie dearly, she wasn't the gentle spirit Daniel had been. Under the pressure of finances and loss, Laura's patience wore thin. Sometimes, when she caught Callie daydreaming about fixing up the stables and training Mustangs again, she would sigh and remind her, perhaps more sharply than intended, "You are not your father." It stung each time Callie heard it, as though all the big dreams and cherished memories were being cast aside. Despite her mother's frustration, Callie never let go of her fascination with horses. Even as a small child, she had shown an uncanny knack for reading a horse's mood. She had once calmed an old, stubborn mare in just 15 minutes by softly patting its shoulder, speaking gently, and never breaking eye contact. Another time, she soothed a skittish foal during a thunderstorm merely with her low, calm voice and a slow, deliberate presence. Whenever her father had witnessed these moments, he would say, "You have a gift, Callie. Someday you'll understand exactly what it's meant for." Now at 12, Callie clung to the memory of those words. She would sit in the stable, abandoned and decaying, running her hands over a battered wooden box that once served as her father's feed chest. Each time she unlatched the lid, she swore she could still smell leather, high, and even the faint musk of Mustangs in the air. Piles of old tack, frayed ropes, and bits of harness lay scattered around. The center of therapy her father had built was now reduced to a neglected relic. Most nights, Callie would retreat to her tiny bedroom once her mother left for a late shift. She would retrieve a ragged notebook titled, "In Harmony with Mustangs," her father's training manual. The ink was smudged in places, corners bent from years of use. Inside, Daniel had jotted down short paragraphs in his meticulous handwriting. "Horses don't need control. They need to know you won't harm them. A Mustang's ears, eyes, and feet speak louder than any whinny if you care to listen. When a horse feels your calm, it can find its own. Whenever she read these lines, it was as if her father stood behind her, guiding her hands over a young Mustang's. Even though her mother dismissed the idea of bringing horses back to the ranch, Callie's dreams stayed stubbornly alive. Sagebrush Valley itself was a small settlement. Neighbors lived spaced out, each with their own patch of land. The few kids in town went to a modest schoolhouse that taught grades 1 through 8. Callie, labeled by classmates as that weird horse girl, rarely got invited to weekend hangouts. She didn't mind much. She preferred listening to sparrows chirp in the ranch yard, or practicing imaginary training sessions with a carved wooden horse she'd made from scraps. She had discovered that the quiet corners of life sometimes offered the deepest joy. It was early March when a knock on the door broke the silence of a lazy afternoon. Laura was in the kitchen, sorting medical supplies to take to the clinic, while Callie was perched on a rickety stool reading her father's notebook. Opening the door, she found Ruth Callahan, an elderly neighbor from down the road. Ruth wore a thick wool sweater despite the mild weather, and carried a small basket containing bread she had baked that morning. "Hello, dear," Ruth said, stepping inside as Laura waved her in. "Hope I'm not interrupting." Her gaze shifted, a mixture of curiosity and concern on her lined face. She settled at the old kitchen table, offering the bread. Laura thanked her, but gave a wary look. Ruth turned to Callie. "How have you been? Sweetheart, you still spending time out in that stable of yours?" Callie nodded, her face lighting up at the prospect of someone who might actually be interested. "Yes, ma'am, it's quiet out there, but I like it." Ruth managed a faint smile. "Reminds you of your father, doesn't it?" That question made Laura's shoulders tense, as though bracing for a subject she'd rather avoid. But Ruth gently continued, "I came by with some news, though I'm not sure how you'll take it. Do you remember Rising Dawn Equine Center? Rising Dawn was once the region's largest horse therapy operation. Daniel had taken Callie there on multiple occasions, collaborating with them to help children who suffered from autism, anxiety, or other challenges. He'd introduced them to the concept of letting Mustangs roam more freely within enclosed spaces, gently guiding them until they chose to approach. Callie nodded eagerly. "Yes, Dad took me there to watch him train a few Mustangs. He said it was one of the best facilities around." Ruth sighed. "Well, they've gone under, bankrupt. The bank seized everything. Now they're auctioning off the horses. That includes the ones that were still in therapy training." Laura frowned, setting a jar of antiseptic wipes on the table. "That's sad, but it happens. What does that have to do with us?" Callie listened quietly. Heart fluttering, Ruth noticed her expression and turned toward her. "Some of these Mustangs, Callie, they're not finished with training. Some might be skittish or traumatized. A number of them could end up at the slaughter line if nobody bids on them. Others may be scooped up cheap, used for work they're not suited for, or left neglected." She paused, letting the gravity sink in. "Your father would have hated seeing them tossed aside." A chill crept over Callie, the memory of her father's emphasis on never abandoning a Mustang in need. "When is the auction?" she asked quietly, a strange determination growing inside her. "In a few days," Ruth replied. "Saturday morning, over by the old fairgrounds in the valley's north corner." That night, Callie barely slept. She lay in bed with a notebook propped on her chest, moonlight slicing through the window. She read over a line scrawled in the margin, likely her father's. "Never let a wild horse remain caged if there's still a chance it can be hurt." The words sparked an idea so fierce that it chased away her exhaustion. She scrambled out from under her blankets, tiptoed across the creaking floorboards, and knelt by a loose plank under her dresser. Sliding it aside, she pulled out a tin can, her secret stash. Over time, she'd squirreled away every spare dollar from birthdays, from pet sitting, from pocket money her grandparents mailed. Counting now, it totaled. She exhaled, imagining the potential final bid for a half-trained or undesirable Mustang. Would that be enough? Her mind raced. Just one horse. Dad would do it. He wouldn't care about the cost if it meant saving a life. By morning, she had made up her mind. She found Laura in the kitchen, sorting out medical tools and supplies for her shift. Carefully, Callie approached. "Mom, there's an auction this weekend for those horses at Rising Dawn. I'd really like to go, just to see," she emphasized. Trying to sound casual, Laura paused, turning around, eyebrows arching. "To see or to buy? Don't even think about it. Callie, we can't afford a horse." "Just," Callie fidgeted. She had never been good at hiding her excitement. I'd love to see if there's any horse if it's cheap enough I have some money too. We don't have the time or resources. Sweetheart, Laura replied in a weary tone. Feeding a horse is expensive. Vet bills alone, Callie insisted. I only want to watch. The auction starts early in the morning. You don't have to stay long, maybe drop me off and pick me up later. Her mother's expression was doubtful, but the fatigue in her eyes seemed to dampen further argument. All right, she said at last. I'll take you, on the condition that you do not, under any circumstance, throw your money at some horse that might be sick or dangerous. Laura leveled a firm look. Promise me. Callie nodded a little too quickly. Yes, I promise, she said, though the resolve already burning in her heart told her the exact opposite. If she saw a Mustang she connected with, one that reminded her of the gentle, patient philosophies her father had poured into her, she would do whatever she could. She would raise her hand at that auction block. Come what may, that evening, she sat at the stable door, the late-day sun gilding the broken boards and rusted hinges. She leaned against the frame, eyes half closed, allowing memory to wash over her. Her father's voice, the shuffle of Mustang hooves, unpacked earth, the smell of leather tack and sweet feed. With each breath, it felt as though she were stepping a little further into a memory, one that glowed in her mind like a treasure she had yet to unearth. In the fading light, the stable seemed to cast long shadows across the yard, as if the past were reaching out to embrace her. She whispered under her breath, repeating a line from her father's notes, "Horses just need to know you won't harm them." Then she closed her eyes and added, quietly, "I won't let them harm you either." Even though the stable stood empty, that promise felt like it was echoing in the hush of the yard, as though someone or something was listening. Through the kitchen window, Laura watched her. She sat down, a mug of coffee, 100 emotions contorting her features. She remembered how Daniel used to stroke Callie's hair, calling her my little empath. He had insisted that their daughter possessed a gift for forging bonds with creatures in need. Laura closed her eyes for a moment, the memory heavy in her chest. Then she turned away, heading to her car for another night shift at the clinic. Morning arrived more swiftly than Callie expected. She busied herself checking the tin can once more. $35, not a small sum for a 12-year-old, but a pittance for anyone serious about purchasing even a problematic Mustang. There was little time for worry. In half an hour, Laura would be driving her to the outskirts of the fairgrounds where the sale was held. After rummaging through her closet, Callie decided on a plain flannel shirt, one of her father's old shirts that fit her like an oversized coat, and some sturdy jeans. She told herself it would be better to look confident, older, just in case she had to talk to the auction. In no time, she and her mother were driving the half-hour north, through dusty roads. Neither spoke much. Laura occasionally shot glances at her daughter, as if searching for any sign of second thoughts. But Callie stared out the window, expression unwavering. She was listening to the same quiet voice in her head that had lulled her to sleep the night before. Just one horse. Dad would have done it. Just one chance. When they pulled up, the fairgrounds were bustling with trailers and trucks. The air smelled of hay, sweat, and old sod. There was a small ring near the center, ringed by temporary fencing, and various onlookers in wide-brimmed hats or dusty boots, leaning against rails. Horses stood in pens, some neighing nervously, others pawing at the ground. Callie stepped out, clutching her tin can inside a worn backpack. Laura gave her a final, almost pleading look. "I'm heading to pick up supplies at the hardware store. I'll be back by noon. Remember your promise." Callie forced a polite smile. "Of course, Mom, I'll just look around." But as Laura's car disappeared into the distance, Callie straightened her shoulders, heart pounding. She could almost feel her father's presence in the swirl of dust kicked up by so many hooves. She had come here for a reason, whether or not that reason made sense to anyone else. And so, she walked toward the pens, her footsteps determined, prepared to listen for the horse that needed her most. Little did she know, somewhere in that crowd, among all the frightened Mustangs awaiting a fate they couldn't comprehend, one very special horse was about to change her life, and perhaps even the lives of those around her, forever. Morning broke over the fairgrounds beneath a bleak sky, laden with low-hanging clouds. A chill clung to the air, and thin fog hovered inches above the trampled dirt. The smell of horse sweat, dust, and fear mingled with the pungent aroma of coffee and fried food from the makeshift vendor stalls. Callie Morgan, clutching her tin can of money deep inside her worn backpack, stepped out into the bustle. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone around could hear it. Here and there, Groups of prospective buyers gathered around pens, peering at Mustangs that trembled or paced restless. Some of the more robust horses neighed loudly, rearing up against the confines, while others stood lethargic, ears pinned back in resignation. Many of the buyers only wanted cheap labor, something to haul logs or perhaps a half-wild creature they could resell at a profit. The entire place felt chaotic, an arena where uncertain fates hung by the thin thread of someone's bid. Callie inhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. She reminded herself of the vow she'd made. If I see a horse I connect with, I won't walk away. It was an audacious promise, especially when she only had a little over 2. But she kept moving, scanning each pen systematically, noticing how the men and women around her sized up the horses with calculating eyes. A small cluster of men in canvas jackets were laughing loudly at a gray mare that kicked the fence. "That one will snap your leg," one declared, spitting on the ground. Useless. Callie shivered. It wasn't the same compassion her father had taught her. These people saw a commodity, not a living being in need. By the time she reached the far end of the fairgrounds, the crowd thinned. The final row of enclosures seemed neglected, overshadowed by the more spirited horses up front. In the last pen she spotted a figure so still that at first, she thought the horse might be ill. Stepping closer, she noticed it was a lean black Mustang, its ribcage starkly visible beneath a dull coat. The left ear bore a ragged tear, and a faint, puckered scar cut across one eye, giving it a permanently wary expression. A handwritten sign was nailed haphazardly on the stall. Orion must. Unreliable responses. History of neurological injury. Not recommended for therapy. Curious. Callie approached. Unlike the other Mustangs that whinnied or stomped when people got too close, this one barely moved. It stood with its head lowered, eyes half-lidded in exhaustion or defeat. Yet as she inched closer, those eyes flickered open. The Mustang studied her. There was fear there, but also a strange sense of awareness, as if it recognized something in Callie that no one else possessed. Callie felt her chest tight. "Why do I feel like I know you?" she thought, pressing a hand softly against the rough wooden beam. The horse's nostrils flared in a brief snort, as though uncertain whether to shy away or approach. She noticed the trembling in its legs, the tension that rippled across its shoulders. Something about this silent, black horse reminded her of the broken way she felt after losing her father, haunted, unsure, clinging to the edges of hope. Voices echoed through the tinny loudspeaker near the center of the fairgrounds. Next up, lot number 20. The auction had begun in earnest. Callie glanced over to see a healthy bay Mustang sold for nearly $3,000 in a matter of minutes. The overhead speaker crackled. "Who'll give me 20? Now do I see 2,700? That's $2,700 out." Final, each time. She realized her own stash of money was a mere drop in this commercial ocean. Finally, the auctioneer, a lanky man with a faded hat who introduced himself as Mr. Greer, paused to consult a clipboard. "All right, folks, we're nearing the end of our listing. Next up, number 27. He cleared his throat. Orion, a black Mustang, estimated 7 years old, previously part of a therapy program, but reported neurological complications. "Let's bring him in." Two handlers yanked open the pen. The black Mustang, Orion balked, hooves sliding on the dirt. He was clearly underweight and unsteady, and the men had to half-push, half-guide him into the ring. A hush fell across the spectators. This was not the sleek, promising horse they'd seen in the earlier lots. Some folks crossed their arms, others muttered to one another about unfixable beasts, or money pits. Mr. Greer took a visible breath, and adjusted his microphone. "Folks, as you can see, Orion here has had some challenges. Not recommended for standard therapy. Might be best suited for, well, a quiet retirement, if you've got land." He tried to maintain a professional tone, but the pity was clear in his voice. "We'll start the bidding at 100. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Nobody raised their hand. Mr. Greer attempted a forced smile. "Do I hear 75? Then there was a long, uncomfortable pause. His eyes scanned the faces. "All right, folks, do I hear Silence. People shifted, coughed, stared anywhere but at the bony Mustang standing with its head drooping. Mr. Greer exhaled. "If we have no bids, we'll have to see about rehoming him through the county or, worst case." Before he could finish, a voice tremulous yet determined rang out. "I'll bid 100. Heads snapped around. Callie felt her cheeks burn. Her hand was trembling in the air. All at once she became the center of attention. A cluster of adult faces turned upon her in astonishment. Mr. Greer raised an eyebrow, peering over the rim of his microphone stand. "Did I hear $100 from the young lady there?" Callie swallowed hard. She repeated more firmly, A chorus of whispers and murmurs swept the ring. Some onlookers smirked. A few felt sympathy. Others regarded her with outright condescension. How could a mere girl possibly handle a case like Orion? Mr. Greer cleared his throat. Mist, do you have your mother or father here? We need an adult's permission. You see, especially for a horse like this. Callie's voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. My mom dropped me off. I have my own money. Please, I know what I'm doing. Still, no one else raised a hand. Why would they bid on a half-dead, possibly neurologically damaged Mustang? Greer waited a bit longer, as though praying for an alternative buyer. When none came, he seemed resigned. All right then, going once at $100, going twice. He paused, scanning the crowd one last time. Sold to the young lady, lot 27. Orion. Callie's heart pounded like a drum in her ears. A wave of dizzy relief and excitement washed over her. She clutched the battered tin can to her chest, walking forward to complete the paperwork with shaky hands. The auction staff gave her astonished looks, verifying her identity, calling her mother to confirm the transaction. She could hear the phone conversation from a few feet away, Laura's exasperated voice, carrying through even without speaker mode. When everything was finalized, a solemn hush hung around them. Orion was hers, officially, but as the handlers led the horse back to a holding pen, she recognized the reality. He was exhausted, malnourished, possibly traumatized. She handed over her carefully saved $100, her breath catching in her throat. She'd used up almost half her funds. Stable gear, feed, and any vet bills would have to come from the remainder. It wasn't long before her mother arrived, face flushed, scanning the grounds anxiously. Catching sight of Callie standing by Orion's pen, she stormed over. Callie Morgan, she hissed. You promised you wouldn't buy anything. Callie turned, tears brimming. Mom, I had to. Nobody else would. They were going to get rid of him. She gestured to Orion, who stood inside the pen, hollow-eyed. It's not right. Laura looked like she wanted to lecture, but the words died on her lips. She stepped to the fence. Orion, sensing someone new, raised his head. For a brief moment, the Mustang's eyes flicked from Laura to Callie, and then he dipped his muzzle, as if acknowledging Callie's presence. A faint hint of curiosity replaced the earlier defeat. Something in that silent interaction made Laura sigh, her anger cooling into reluctant compassion. All right, she muttered, we'll figure this out. But Callie, how are we going to pay for everything? We can't even. I'll do chores. I'll find part-time work. Callie cut in, her tone intense. I won't let him die, I promise. Shaking her head, Laura motioned for the stable staff. They arranged to borrow a small horse trailer from Ruth Callahan, who had shown up just after the auction ended. While hooking Orion up, Laura noticed the horses trembling again, as if standing took every ounce of his strength. She placed a cautious hand against his neck. Under the coarse mane, Orion's skin twitched, but he didn't pull away. His body was hot to the touch, and alarmingly thin. Stubborn, she mumbled, glancing at her daughter. Both him and you. Callie only smiled, brushing her fingers lightly along the tattered rope halter. It's all right, she whispered to Orion. You're coming home now. They coaxed him inside the borrowed trailer. The ride back seemed endless. Callie felt every jolt in the road as though it were a threat to Orion's fragile state. Once they arrived at the ranch, she hurried to prepare the middle stall. Layers of dust had settled over the old stable floor. Bits of broken tack still hung from nails. Ignoring the sore ache in her arms, she cleared out debris, spread fresh hay, and filled a bucket with water. When they opened the trailer, Orion stepped onto the ground with stiff, hesitant motions. He barely glanced around, making no attempt to run. It was as if he had accepted his fate long ago, resignation etched into every tense muscle. As Laura and Ruth guided him into the stall, Callie followed close behind, heart pounding with protective urgency. She saw the horse's flanks heave, as he coughed once. There was dryness in his eyes that worried her, as if dehydration had claimed whatever spark of life once lingered. Yet, in that fleeting moment, Orion turned his head, meeting Callie's gaze through a curtain of unkempt mane. The corners of his eyes held something, an unspoken question, maybe, or a silent hope. She exhaled softly, tears burning at the corners of her own eyes. You're home, she told him. I promise I won't let you down. As the trailer rattled away with Ruth at the wheel, leaving them alone in the yard, Callie felt a heavy tension. Daylight revealed the stable's sorry condition, from the cracked beams overhead to the musty corners that had once been alive with her father's lively Mustangs. She was determined to make it a home again,
but Orion's precarious state demanded every ounce of effort. She'd cleaned the center stall, laying fresh straw, and set out a bucket of water along with a small supply of oats. Orion, however, showed no inclination to eat or drink. He stood in the far corner, head drooping, eyes half closed. When Callie approached, offering the oats in a shallow bowl, he didn't even flinch. She could almost feel his hopelessness radiating through the thick, stable air. Throughout that first afternoon, she tried all sorts of gentle coaxing, soft words, a handful of sweet feet, even slicing an apple into tiny pieces. Yet the Mustang remained eerily still. Whenever she dared to place a hand on his flank, his entire body stiffened, ears flattening. He was like a statue carved from black stone. The only response was a muted quiver, as if he expected a blow to come at any moment. "He's traumatized," Callie murmured, stepping away to give him space. She remembered reading about stress and neglected horses, how they sometimes shut down in self-preservation. He's not just hurt in his body, but in his soul. By dusk, she was exhausted. Laura, peering around the stable door, gave her a weary look. "Any progress?" Callie's shoulders sagged. "No, he hasn't touched the oats or the water, and he's hardly blinked all day." Laura's mouth tight. "Callie, maybe he's too far gone. You did your best. We can talk to the vet. See if—" "No," Callie interrupted, though her voice trembled. "He's alive. He came here for a reason." Laura paused, then just nodded solemnly. "All right, but don't run yourself ragged. If you need help, call me." Once night settled, the stable grew quiet. Callie left the door to Orion's stall slightly ajar, so she could peek inside. The Mustang still stood unmoving, like a ghost lingering on the threshold between life and death. A part of her began to worry about how little she actually knew. She reached for her father's notebook, flipping to the earliest chapters that described his approach to Mustang harmony. "Wild horses don't need controlling. They need to know you mean them no harm." He had carefully listed steps. Avoid direct eye contact, which can be interpreted as a threat. Maintain a soft, level voice, and let the horse approach on its own terms. One note read, "Some Mustangs respond best to a low whistle. Try 2-3 repeated notes to reassure them there's no predator around." Callie recalled how her father would stand in the open corral, whistling a gentle tune as the Mustang circled. They'd eventually drift toward him, accepting the calm he radiated. Maybe, she thought, that was the key for Orion as well. But for now he wasn't moving at all. The next 3 days were a grueling test of Callie's commitment. Each morning, she quietly entered the stable, made sure fresh water and hay were within Orion's reach, then lingered a few feet away, reading aloud from any book she could find, usually old horse care manuals or random library novels. She spoke softly, reciting paragraphs about nothing in particular, her voice calm and measured. Orion remained unresponsive, except for an occasional twitch of an ear. At night, she draped a worn-out cloth of her father's over a rail, inside the stall, hoping Orion might grow accustomed to her scent. She scribbled daily notes in a small journal. Day 1, ears pinned whenever I stepped closer than 3 feet. Day 2, he drank a small amount of water in the evening. I only know because the water level changed. Day 3, he let me place a hand near his shoulder without flinching. Progress felt painfully slow, but she clung to each small sign. She tried to remind herself that a creature this hurt, both physically and mentally, couldn't bounce back overnight. Still, the toll weighed on her. By the 5th evening, Laura approached her in the yard, posture tense. The mother's eyes flicked to the stable, where Orion's silhouette was barely visible under the single lantern. "Callie," she began gently, "I see how hard you're working, but he just stands there. He won't eat the mash you bring, right?" Callie nodded, biting her lower lip.
"He only drinks water at night, when no one's around." Laura's face was etched with concern. "We can't force him if he's given up. Maybe he's in constant pain. We could talk to the vet about letting him go before he suffers more." Tears sparked in Callie's eyes, but she held them back. "Mom, please, just a little more time. If Dad were here, he'd know exactly how to reach him." Laura exhaled, voice breaking with her own grief. "I'm not your father, honey, but if you need more time, I won't stop you." That night, as the wind rattled the stable roof, Callie sat on a bale of straw watching Orion's quiet form. "You have to believe," she whispered, half to him, half to herself. "I won't hurt you. No one will. You're safe." A faint tremor passed through his flank, and she took that as a glimmer of acknowledgement. When she finally trudged inside to her room, sleep claimed her in fits. She dreamed of her father guiding a black Mustang, the two silhouettes merging under a rising sun. She woke up with a start sometime near midnight, heart pounding with an idea. Reaching for the notebook, she scanned the lines about whistle therapy, recalling that her father had sometimes repeated 3 low notes right before feeding. Could Orion respond to that? Early the next morning, she tried stepping up to the stall and whistling softly. 3 descending notes, but Orion remained in his corner, motionless, undeterred. She repeated the attempt each day. Meanwhile, she built up an environment of quiet consistency. No sudden noises, no jarring touches. In time, she noticed that while Orion didn't actively approach, his ears flicked slightly more when she read stories or recited random bits of information. It was as if beneath his fear he was beginning to realize she wouldn't hurt him. On day 6, a small breakthrough. She found footprints in the straw near the untouched oats, as if Orion had come forward while she was away. She excitedly noted the change in her journal. It was, in her eyes, the first spark of hope that maybe he didn't want to wither away after all. Late on the 7th night, the stable lay under a clear sky. Stars shimmered in the crisp air, and the wind had quieted to a gentle hush. Callie sat on a low stool outside Orion's stall, flipping through her father's notebook once more. Her eyes landed on a passage scrawled in the margin. Some Mustangs with neurological scars only respond to a familiar auditory cue. Don't give up if they don't react at first. Repetition can create that thread of memory. She remembered how her father had a specific whistle. 3 low, elongated notes whenever he fed certain anxious horses. She'd tried a variation of it during the day, but maybe Orion was too fearful with the daylight activity. Now, in the silence of night, she felt compelled to try again. Gathering her courage, she stepped quietly into the stall. Orion stood with his back to her, his dull black coat catching just a faint glimmer from the lantern overhead. She noticed how his body tensed as soon as she approached. But he didn't move away this time. Her heart fluttered. Taking a steady breath, she pursed her lips and whistled. Foo! At first, she thought the Mustang hadn't heard. But then the left ear, torn at the tip, twitched. A subtle shift in his posture told her he was listening. Excitement swelled in Callie's chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. She waited a few seconds, then repeated the whistle. This time, Orion's head lifted a fraction. She could see the side of his face, the scar crossing his eye like a painful reminder of old trauma. His breath sounded ragged, but he turned just enough that she could see both eyes. Encouraged, Callie retreated a few steps. As her father's notes advised not to crowd an anxious horse, she set down a shallow pan containing softened oats and a bit of bran mixed with warm water. Carefully, she whistled again. Foo, foo, while gesturing gently toward the food. Orion shifted his weight for a moment. He merely stared. Then he took a small step forward. The shuffle of hooves over straw made Callie's heart leap. She kept absolutely still. Aside from repeating the whistle, each note measured inch by inch. Orion edged closer until his muzzle hovered over the pan. He sniffed, tension evident in the lines of his neck. He's going to do it. Callie almost held her breath. With another shaky exhale, Orion lowered his muzzle, pressing it into the damp mixture. He paused, possibly unsure. Then, in a move that sent a surge of joy through Callie, he took a careful bite, chewing slowly. Tears threatened to spill down her face. She stifled a gasp, covering her mouth with one hand. It had only been a single mouthful, but to her it felt like watching a wilting flower turn its face toward the sun for the first time. Orion swallowed, sniffed the remaining feed, and took another bite, 3 or 4 small mouthfuls total. Then he turned away, retreating to his corner as though overwhelmed by this monumental trust. But he hadn't bolted. And that, Callie realized, was everything. She whispered, "You're coming back to life, aren't you?" Stepping outside the stall so as not to startle him, Callie found herself too elated to go to bed. She grabbed a few more handfuls of oats, readied them for the next day's feed, and jotted down the details in her journal. Time, around midnight. Method, 3-note whistle. Result, Orion ate 3 and 4 bites of softened oats. Retreated after, but less tense. Possible breakthrough. Unable to contain her excitement, she spread an old blanket on the straw just outside the stall. Propping a small lantern, she stayed up reading her father's notebook, glancing over at Orion every so often. He remained in the shadows, but the tension in his posture seemed fractionally less rigid. Eventually, Callie fell asleep there, the pages of the notebook resting over her chest, a soft smile on her lips. When morning came, Laura found her daughter curled on the straw with flecks of hay in her hair. A worried look flitted across her face, but when she saw the partially empty feed pan in Orion's stall, her expression turned to cautious hope. "He ate?" she asked softly. Callie yawned, sitting up. "He did," she replied, voice thick with sleep. "Just a little, but it's a start." Her mother nodded, stepping closer to the stall. Orion eyed her, then shifted to rest more weight on one hind leg, a sign of slight relaxation. He didn't approach, but he also didn't flatten his ears or turn away. It was as though the fortress of fear he'd erected was beginning to crack. "Maybe there's a chance," Laura said softly, the hint of emotion caught in her throat. She turned to Callie. "I'll call Dr. Harrison at the clinic to see if he can spare some time to do a quick checkup, at least to make sure we're not missing anything medically urgent." Callie's face brightened. "That would be great. Thank you, Mom." A gentle breeze swept through the stable yard, rustling the nearby grass. Callie leaned against the stall door, gazing at Orion with renewed determination. She could almost sense her father's voice in the back of her mind. "If you give a Mustang a reason to trust, it will find the strength to believe again." Now, with that first bite taken, she was convinced Orion had chosen life over despair. And though countless challenges still lay ahead, Callie felt certain that together, they could unravel his wounds one gentle step at a time. Late one afternoon, after cleaning out the cluttered corner of the old barn, Callie stumbled upon a scuffed gray leather saddlebag that had clearly seen better days. Dust and cobwebs clung to its surface, and the buckles were tinged with rust. She lifted it carefully, surprised at how heavy it felt, despite its modest size. Setting it on a workbench, she unfastened the straps, heart thumping with a vague anticipation that whatever was inside might be important. At first, she saw nothing but a tangle of old rags. Then, nestled underneath, she discovered a slim plastic folder, its edges worn and slightly bent. A faded ID tag was tucked under one corner, the ink all but rubbed away except for a faint line of text. "Orion Early Response Project." Her breath caught Orion's name. She carefully slid out the folder, noticing a short note scrawled in handwriting that looked unsettlingly familiar. Scanning the cursive, her eyes widened when she recognized her father's signature. Daniel Morgan. The date on the note was over a year and a half old, around the time of Rising Dawn's financial troubles. Realizing the significance, she rushed to the house, calling for her mother. Laura, finishing up a phone call in the kitchen, came over with a puzzled expression when she saw Callie holding the dusty saddlebag. "In here," Callie said, voice trembling with a mix of excitement and anxiety. "I found some papers. And look, Dad's name." They moved to the small wooden table in the corner of the kitchen. Under the bright overhead light, they spread out the contents of the plastic folder, neither speaking, but sharing the sense that they were on the verge of a revelation. Laura flipped through the pages, adjusting her reading glasses. Her background as a veterinary assistant helped her parse the dense medical jargon and detailed training logs. One of the first documents bore the header, "Mustang Seizure Alert Experiment, Rising Dawn Equine Center." Beneath it, highlighted lines referred to a specialized project for pre-epileptic detection in humans. Further reading revealed that the staff at Rising Dawn had selected specific Mustangs with heightened sensitivity to hormone shifts, particularly cortisol spikes in individuals about to experience a seizure. Callie's mother explained quietly, "They call it a Mustang Early Response Program." These notes say that Orion was part of a trial aiming to teach horses to recognize minute changes in breathing and stress hormones, signs someone might be about to have a seizure. She paused, eyes flicking across another page. "He apparently showed strong reactions to sudden shifts in cortisol levels, especially if a person's breathing became shallow or panicked." The next section was more cautionary, with bold red ink scrawled near the bottom. "Signs of abnormal neurological responses. Subject may be experiencing partial seizures of its own. Recommended withdrawal from therapy training until further data can be collected." Laura shook her head in disbelief. So, he was once on track to be a remarkable therapy horse, one that could alert children or adults before a seizure. But they labeled him as unstable when he started showing signs of his own neurological strain. Callie's eyes skimmed lines about how Orion's preemptive responses might have been misunderstood. Her gaze stopped at a paragraph that stated,
High potential for specialized seizure alert therapy, not reaching stable baseline yet. Program lacks funding to continue. The final note in ominous red lettering read, removed from program. Possible neurological disorder. Funding expired. No further tests. Setting down the paper, Callie's thoughts swirled. Orion's so-called bizarre behavior and half-diagnosed condition might have been the reason no one else wanted him. He was deemed faulty for therapy use, when in reality, he'd never been given the chance to prove what he could do. Callie turned another page and found a letter from the Rising Dawn management, dated about a month before Daniel Morgan's death. It thanked him for his pioneering insights on Mustang panic reduction techniques, specifically mentioning Orion by name. They praised Daniel's approach to non-violent de-escalation, which had supposedly helped reduce the anxiety of certain test horses in the program. She swallowed hard, reading the official signature at the bottom. Dad consulted for them. He must have known about Orion, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Maybe Daniel had never openly discussed it, because the project was under wraps or had become precarious when funding dried up. It looks like your father contributed methods to calm Mustangs with hypersensitivity, Laura murmured. That means Orion may have heard his voice, felt his touch. He might have recognized something in you, your approach, because it mirrors your father's. Callie's chest tightened. No wonder it felt like destiny, she thought. The horse she had rescued on a whim might actually be linked to her father's final project. The notion that Orion had once been guided, if only indirectly, by Daniel Morgan filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. She gently ran her fingers over the signature, as if bridging the gap between past and present. It wasn't just random, she said softly. I think we were meant to find each other. After cross-referencing the notes, they pieced together a likely timeline. Orion had displayed extraordinary sensitivity. He responded to early signs of oncoming seizures in children, possibly picking up on cortisol spikes or changes in breathing. But with Rising Dawn going bankrupt and the staff overstretched, the horse's own subtle seizures or neurological quirks were mistaken for a failure in training. Deemed too great a liability, Orion had been relegated to the discard pile. Sitting at the kitchen table, Callie felt anger bubble up. They thought he was defective when he was actually valuable. If someone had just given him the right care. Laura set a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. Sometimes, budgets and practicality overshadow what truly matters. She offered a wry, regretful smile. It's not fair, but it's the reality in many places. Callie stood, hugging the file to her chest. Outside, Orion lingered near the half-repaired stable door, his head turned as though he were listening. The steady progress they'd made since the day she brought him home suddenly felt monumental. Orion, she murmured to herself. Nobody understood you, but you never failed. You just needed someone to see you for who you are. She left the house, crossing the yard toward him. Even from a distance, she could see the shift in his posture, ears tipping forward to catch her approach. I promise, she said under her breath. This time, we'll do it right, determined to help Orion fulfill the destiny her father had glimpsed. Callie laid out an ambitious schedule on a large piece of poster board, taping it to the stable wall where she could see it daily. She drew 3 columns, feed, exercise, and sensory-emotional training. On feeding, she planned 3 small meals each day, enriched feeds that wouldn't overload his neurological system. Thanks to local advice and references in Daniel's notebook, she included supplements to address inflammation and nerve health. To exercise, each morning, Callie would lead Orion on 2 slow circuits of the ranch, letting him graze on mild grasses if he wanted. Then a shorter walk in the late afternoon to gradually rebuild muscle tone. 3. Sensory-emotional training, based on the notes about his sensitivity. She wanted to incorporate triggers in controlled ways, soft footsteps or abrupt ones, allowing Orion to differentiate calm versus anxious movement. Gentle breathing exercises. She would stand next to him, exaggerate calm, deep breath. Over time, she'd introduce friends who pretended to pant or hyperventilate mildly, to gauge his reaction, using the handle of a spoon or a small metal rod to make a tap-tap noise, reminiscent of certain medical environments, to see if Orion recognized the shift in a person's mood or stress level. Each day's results would be recorded in a fresh notebook she called Orion's recovery log. She placed it next to her father's In Harmony with Mustangs, so she could cross-reference how Daniel might have handled these steps. In her mind, it felt like working side by side with him again, forging a bridge that spanned life and death. Every afternoon around 4, Ruth Callahan arrived carrying either a basket of homemade biscuits or a small bag of treats for Orion. She had once been a certified equine therapy assistant, specializing in children with anxiety and sensory processing issues. Although she'd long since retired, her knowledge was invaluable. Standing in the stable yard, Ruth guided Callie through the signals children with high anxiety might display. They might clutch their ears, she explained, demonstrating with her own hands or pull at their sleeves as if wanting to vanish. Some freeze up entirely, not making a sound. Callie nodded, scribbling notes in her log. And how should Orion respond if we're aiming for a calming effect? The best therapy horses approach gently, Ruth answered, sometimes blocking the child from overwhelming sights, or they can initiate soft physical contact, like a muzzle touch to the hand, reminding the child they aren't alone. When they tested these strategies with Orion, he showed surprising aptitude. If Callie or Ruth pretended to be upset, he would crane his neck, ears swiveling forward, and carefully close the distance. He'd then lower his muzzle to a hand or an arm, as though offering silent reassurance. Ruth watched, tears in her eyes. It's as if he's remembering a skill he already had. He truly is picking up where Rising Dawn left off. One tranquil morning, after a brief session walking around the ranch, Orion abruptly lurched. His forelegs stiffened, and his eyes went unfocused. Callie recognized the signs from the notes. He was experiencing a mild seizure. Instead of panicking, she followed the plan laid out in harmony with Mustangs, and the new knowledge gleaned from equine medical sources. Stay quiet. She did not shout for help, nor did she try to touch him mid-episode. 2. She stepped back to ensure he wouldn't bump into anything, or injure himself. 3. Track time. She glanced at her watch, noting it was 8:14 a.m. The tremors lasted about 2.5 minutes. When the seizure subsided, Orion stood trembling, sweat darkening his coat. Callie gently approached, speaking in a low tone. Hey, big guy, it's okay. I'm here. She offered a warm, damp cloth, wiping around his nostrils and eyes. Then she carefully guided him to a cooler spot in the shade, letting him sip water laced with electrolyte. Once his breathing slowed, she softly whispered, "You're not alone in this. We'll deal with it together." Though her hands shook with residual adrenaline, she refused to show fear, remembering that a nervous caretaker could further stress a sensitive Mustang. Over the following weeks, Orion's progress was nothing short of remarkable. Where once he flinched or froze at the slightest sign of tension, he began to move toward individuals who showed agitation. During a mild family argument in the stable yard, some dispute between Laura and a visiting relative, Callie noticed Orion inching closer to her mother, as though attempting to calm her. If someone breathed heavily, distressed or on the verge of tears, Orion's ears pricked forward, and he would gently press his muzzle to the person's shoulder. Callie documented each instance with a date and short description. April 14th to Peter. Orion approached me after I found out my history test grade was terrible. He sensed my upset mood and nuzzled my jacket. April 16th, 5 p.m. A neighbor's child was crying. Orion walked over unprompted, lowered his head, and stood quietly until the child stopped sobbing. One afternoon, Callie invited a classmate to the ranch, Tony, a shy boy who often hid in the back row at school. The moment Tony curled himself in a corner of the stable, arms wrapped around his knees, Orion stepped away from Callie and lay down near him, sides heaving softly. Within minutes, Tony reached out to stroke Orion's mane, tears forgotten. Observing this, Callie wrote in her journal, "He knows sadness, and he wants to help. It's not just training, it's empathy." With Ruth's encouragement, Callie decided it was time to let Orion interact with someone who genuinely needed therapy assistance. Elijah Ward, a neighborhood boy, had developed intense anxiety after a car accident. Ever since, he avoided large gatherings, loud noises, and sudden movement. If the plan was to see if Orion could handle real therapy situations, the upcoming summer festival in Sagebrush Springs offered the perfect trial by fire. They arranged a meeting with Elijah's mother, who was at her wit's end. He refuses to leave the house sometimes, she admitted. He used to love fairs, cotton candy, petting zoos. Now the thought of stepping into a crowd sets him off. Callie, with quiet determination, suggested, "What if Elijah meets Orion at the festival? I'll keep him calm. Orion will be wearing a special vest. We can see how he reacts in a busy environment." Elijah's mother hesitated, then nodded. "All right, if you think it can help, let's try." Every summer, Sagebrush Springs celebrated the season's peak with a lively festival. Bunting and banners lined Main Street. Local musicians played on hastily assembled stages, and small fireworks crackled at intervals throughout the day. Cowboy hats dotted the crowd, and kids ran about with sticky cotton candy while barbecue smoke wafted through the air. This year's event promised even more bustle. Traveling performers had joined in, bringing colorful costumes, trick riding demonstrations, and an amateur parade. Callie arrived in the early afternoon wearing one of her father's old white shirts, too big for her, but she belted it at the waist. She led Orion by a loose lead rope, a laminated badge around his neck that read, "Orion, Therapy Mustang in Training." Heads turned as they made their way past stalls selling kettle corn and homemade jam. Some folks murmured in recognition, "Is that the black Mustang everyone was talking about?" Others cast wary looks, apparently recalling rumors that Orion had once been considered unfit or dangerous. Undeterred, Callie simply nodded politely. She found a quieter corner near a wooden picnic table, where Ruth and Elijah's mother were waiting. Elijah stood behind his mom, wearing noise-canceling headphones and gripping her sleeve. The crowd noise was already testing his limits. Kneeling beside him, Callie offered a reassuring smile. "Hey Elijah, I brought Orion, he's calm." The boy peered at the sleek black horse with timid curiosity. Orion flicked an ear, looking back with what seemed like gentle interest. So far so good. Callie hoped it would stay that way. The first half hour at the festival passed uneventfully. Elijah inched closer to Orion, occasionally touching his flank, or carefully stroking his mane under Callie's guidance. They practiced deep, slow breathing, Callie demonstrating, Elijah mimicking. Orion stood patiently, ears swiveling toward every new sound, but never shying or rearing up. But as evening approached, a group of local musicians climbed on stage near the fairgrounds center. Drums thundered, and a singer belted out lively tunes. The real shock came when a small fireworks display went off earlier than scheduled. A bright whistle, a succession of bangs, and sudden bursts of color overhead. The crowd whooped and clapped, but for Elijah, it was as if the sky had fallen. He froze, eyes wide. Then, with a trembling cry, he clapped his hands over his ears and dropped to the ground, knees drawn up in panic. His mother, caught off guard by the noisy rush of people around them, stumbled and nearly lost hold of him. The boy's breaths came in ragged, shallow gasps. Callie was about to leap forward, but Orion moved. The moment the fireworks exploded, he jerked the lead rope from her hand with surprising force. Instead of bolting though, he headed straight toward Elijah, crossing the short distance in a calm, purposeful walk. Callie felt her heart lurch. Ruth grabbed her arm. "Wait," the older woman said quietly. "Let him do it." Elijah cowered, tears brimming, body rigid. Orion halted a yard away, lowering his head as if to get a clear sense of the boy's state. Then, ever so slowly, the Mustang pressed his muzzle against Elijah's shoulder, blocking him from the chaotic swirl of festival goers. It looked almost like Orion was shielding him from the crowd's view, positioning his large body between Elijah and the throngs. A hush fell around them. Onlookers who had been chatting moments ago stood transfixed. Callie noticed that Elijah's rapid breathing began to slow. The boy gripped Orion's mane, eyes squeezed shut, leaning into the horse's solid presence. Within a minute, the child's sobs quieted. He opened his eyes, found himself gazing into Orion's calm, dark stare. He swallowed, tension ebbing from his thin shoulders. Tentatively, Elijah wrapped both arms around Orion's neck, burying his face against the horse's side. The Mustang held absolutely still. In that single moment, the festival's noise faded away, leaving a scene that radiated quiet wonder. The circle of spectators expanded, yet no one spoke. Cameras rose, capturing photos and short video. A few older ranchers, men who had scoffed at the idea of therapy Mustangs, looked on with eyes brimming with amazement. Some teared up, others took off their hats in silent respect. Among them was an elderly man who'd once declared Mustangs to be wild nuisance. He whispered, voice thick, "I didn't think these horses had it in them." Glancing at Ruth, he admitted with a half smile, "Guess I was wrong." Ruth's lips curved in a trembling smile, a tear slipping down her cheek. "This kind of empathy, you can't force it. It's either in them or it's not." Orion clearly has it. Nearby, a local newspaper reporter snapped pictures, while another local influencer recorded with a phone. The hush broke as families began murmuring admiration. "He's incredible," someone said. "Who trained that horse?" asked another. And the quick, humble answer was that no one had taught Orion to do this. Yes, Callie had practiced with him, but what happened just now was beyond scripted training. It was a natural, heartfelt reaction. As Elijah finally loosened his grip, his mother rushed forward, tears streaming. She stroked Orion's neck, gratitude shining on her face. "He's never let anyone hold him like that when he's panicked," she said. "He wouldn't even let me, but this horse, he just..." Her voice broke off. Callie felt her own eyes grow misty. She stood at Orion's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. He turned his head slightly, acknowledging her presence with a calm blink. She recalled her father's words about Mustangs that could sense a person's hidden turmoil. "He's not just a horse that can do therapy. He's a horse that chooses to do it." The difference was colossal. After the incident, parents approached Callie one by one, asking about Orion, about whether he could help their children who struggled with night terrors or anxiety. Some had kids who refused to attend school because of social phobia. Others had teens dealing with stress from academic pressure. Callie felt momentarily overwhelmed by all the interest, uncertain how to respond. She never set out to become a beacon of community therapy. Her only goal had been to save one horse that needed her. Now it seemed Orion was saving them right back. Among those who reached out was the mother of a nonverbal child who had recently been diagnosed with autism. "Could we come see Orion?" she asked hesitantly. "Even just to let my daughter stand near him." The woman explained how her child became hysterical at the slightest crowd or noise, but responded oddly well to stuffed animals shaped like horses. Elijah's own mother wrote a heartfelt thank you note to Callie the next day, recounting how her son, still shaky from the episode, had for the first time in months managed to talk about his fears. "He actually described how the horse felt," she wrote in looping script. "He said, 'Orion was warm, and I wasn't alone.' I can't remember the last time I heard him speak so openly." Local reporters soon caught wind of the story. A short piece appeared in the Sagebrush Valley Gazette, with a photo of Elijah and Orion. The headline read, "Magic Mustang or Teenage Miracle Worker." Within days, the tale spread on social media, with short videos of Orion's gentle rescue at the festival. Callie found herself invited to a small educational conference on special needs children hosted by the county. Hesitant but encouraged by Ruth, she agreed to speak. Standing in front of an audience of teachers, therapists, and curious townsfolk, Callie clenched the note cards in her sweaty hands. Taking a breath, she began, "I'm not a professional. I'm only 13. She paused to let a small ripple of laughter pass. "But I've learned that sometimes, an animal's instinct to comfort can surprise us more than any training manual. Orion doesn't heal anyone by himself. He just shows people that they aren't alone in the world." Silence hovered for a moment. Then applause thundered through the little auditorium. Faces smiled back at her with admiration and tears. She bowed her head, stepping away from the lectern, feeling shy yet oddly relieved, because in that statement, she'd summed up exactly what Orion was all about. Not a magical creature with superpowers, but a living, breathing soul whose compassion bridged gaps words couldn't.
Late one afternoon, as the summer sun dipped behind the old barn, a sleek black SUV rumbled up the gravel driveway of the Morgan Ranch. The vehicle looked out of place in the modest surroundings, its tinted windows reflecting the rolling fields of Sagebrush Valley. Callie, who had been brushing Orion's mane at the time, felt a sense of unease prickle at the back of her mind. A tall, impeccably dressed man stepped out. His expensive shoes crunched on the gravel. He smoothed down his suit jacket and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, projecting an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Laura came out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Callie stayed by Orion's side, curiosity mingling with a trace of dread. "Good afternoon," the stranger greeted, his voice poised. "I'm Dr. Conrad Vale, representing the EquiCare Foundation." He extended a business card, crisp, professionally printed. "I've been hearing remarkable things about Orion." Laura glanced at the card, then at Callie. "You've heard about him from the news?" she asked, recalling recent local coverage of Orion's success at the summer festival. "Precisely. Orion's story has spread well beyond this county," Dr. Vale said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "My organization would like to discuss a life-changing opportunity for both you and your daughter." He gestured politely for them to gather on the porch. Once seated, he wasted little time. "We understand the financial challenges that come with caring for a special needs Mustang. The EquiCare Foundation is prepared to purchase Orion for $200,000. In addition, we'd sign a training contract with you, Mrs. Morgan, ensuring a steady income and full coverage for your daughter's future educational aspirations." Laura's eyes widened. Callie felt her stomach twist. The man's tone, though friendly, had the precision of a skilled salesman. A single figure, $200,000, dangled in the hot summer air, so large that it made the entire ranch seem small by comparison. We would relocate Orion to a national therapy center, Dr. Vale continued. Hundreds, even thousands of children could benefit from his unique abilities every year, and Callie could be credited as his primary handler in all our literature. With scholarship opportunities laid out for her, it's quite a generous package. Callie's hand subconsciously tightened on Orion's halter. Her heart pounded. She had no idea how her mother would react, but the man was offering a sum that could wipe out years of financial hardship in a heartbeat. That evening, after Vale departed, Laura sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. A single overhead bulb cast warm light across her thoughtful face. On the counter lay a piece of paper where she had jotted down the bullet points. 1. Enough to clear debts, expand the property, or even buy a small veterinary clinic. 2. Exclusive training contract, additional income. 3. Scholarship, Callie's college or specialized education fully funded. For a woman who had been juggling overdue bills and the daily stress of multiple part-time jobs, it felt like a dream. Closing her eyes, she imagined having the security to open a private practice. She pictured giving Callie the education she deserved, not limited by budget constraints. Yet the other side of the coin weighed heavily. Orion, he wasn't just an asset. Callie's face lit up every time she worked with him. He had become a symbol of hope, not only for the children who benefited from his empathy, but for Callie herself, who had come out of her shell since Daniel's passing. Laura found Callie in the living room, sorting through her father's old training note. Quietly, she settled next to her daughter on the worn couch. Callie, she began, her voice wavering. You do realize what $200,000 could mean for us, right? Callie stared down at the notes in her lap. It means we wouldn't struggle to pay the bills, she answered in a low voice. It could mean you'd have your own clinic, she exhaled shakily. I know, Mom. What about your future? Laura pressed gently. Better schooling, funds for any program you want, anywhere. It's huge. Slowly, Callie set the notes aside. I'm not saying it's not big, but do you think any amount of money is worth giving up, Orion? She looked her mother in the eyes. He's not just a horse to me. He's a friend, a partner. I can't just send him away to some giant center I've never even seen. Laura's gaze. I won't force you to do anything against your will, but we have to at least consider the possibility. Callie nodded, tears threatening to rise. We'll think about it, but Mom, Orion's more than a therapy horse. He's part of the family now. I don't want to lose him like we lost Dad. The next day, Dr. Vale returned, exuding the same polished confidence as before. Laura was at work, so Callie met him at the ranch gate. The moment she saw him step from the SUV with that bright, rehearsed smile, her resolve hardened. Hello again, he greeted, scanning the yard for any sign of Laura. Is your mother around? Callie stood straighter, gripping the fence rail. She's at the clinic, but that doesn't matter. I have an answer for you, Vale. Raised an eyebrow, and that would be shaking off the nerves that churned in her stomach. Callie spoke clearly. No, I'm not selling Orion, he chuckled, a hint of condescension in his tone. You're a child, you can't fully grasp the magnitude of what a national therapy center can do, or how many children your horse could help. Callie's cheeks flushed. I do understand, she retorted. I understand how important therapy is. I've seen Orion help kids right here, but he needs people who see him as a living soul, not a commodity. We might be small, but we care about him. He's not for sale, not for any price. Vale's smile faded, replaced by a cool neutrality. My dear, if you want Orion's talents recognized, you can't cling to him in a remote town. Think how many thousands could benefit if he were in a fully equipped facility. There's a difference, Callie replied, her voice trembling only slightly, between helping children and turning a horse into a research subject. Orion's not a piece of lab equipment. He stared at her, frustration flickering across his features. After a moment, he handed her a glossy business card. I'll leave this here. Should you or your mother reconsider, call me. He walked back to the SUV, each stride radiating displeasure. Before sliding into the driver's seat, he shot her a sharp look. Don't let childish sentiment blind you. Opportunities like this don't come twice. Then he sped away, leaving a swirl of dust in his wake. Callie stood rooted, pulse pounding with both fear and an unyielding certainty that something was off about Dr. Vale's intentions. That night, Callie couldn't sleep. A thunderstorm raged outside, lightning illuminating the ranch in sporadic bursts. She sat by her bedroom window, clutching a small notebook, jotting down every detail about Dr. Vale's visits. License plate of the black SUV, dates and times he appeared, exact wording of his offers, which seemed oddly businesslike for a philanthropic foundation. She wondered, why offer so much money for a horse once labeled unfit for therapy? Why not simply sponsor the Morgan Ranch if they truly wanted to support Orion's mission? Her mother had recounted how the original files about Orion had vanished from the Rising Dawn records. That puzzle piece nagged at Callie. She confided in Ruth, who suggested they keep an eye out for anything suspicious. Vehicles circling the ranch at night, phone calls that cut off whenever someone answered, or references to equicare that didn't match official statement. Ruth summarized it best. If this is truly a philanthropic group, they'd respect your stance. They wouldn't push so aggressively, and they certainly wouldn't offer an astronomical sum for one horse who used to be considered worthless. In the flicker of lightning, Callie held Orion's halter rope in her hands, an uneasy determination thrumming in her chest. "I'm not letting them take him," she whispered, "no matter what it costs us." Why, midnight had passed, and the Morgan Ranch lay still under a cloudy sky. A few stars peeked through the gloom. Inside the house, Callie jolted awake at a shrill, desperate sound. Orion's whinny, sharper and more urgent than anything she'd heard before, echoed through the walls. Her pulse quickened. She rushed to her bedroom window, heart leaping into her throat at the sight of flickering orange light. Flames licked at the night air from the direction of the stable. Horror seized her. "Mom!" she screamed, dashing out of her room. The stable's on fire. Laura, half asleep in a rumpled t-shirt, ran into the hallway. Her eyes widened in alarm. "Call 911, she shouted, grabbing her phone. But Callie didn't wait. She tore down the stairs and out the front door without even slipping on shoes. Adrenaline overriding reason. Outside, the acrid smell of burning wood assaulted her nostrils. The old timbers of the stable, dried and weakened from years of disuse, were engulfed. Fire crackled and roared, devouring the building. Sparks drifted upward in a terrifying display of orange embers against the black sky. In the midst of the chaos, Orion's panicked cries rang out, echoing across the ranch yard. Callie's blood ran cold. Orion was inside, locked into his stall for the night. The ring of fear turned to unwavering resolve as she sprinted through drifting embers and swirling smoke. She nearly tripped on a coil of hose near a rusty water pump, cursing the delay. The stable's door was beginning to warp from the heat, but she shoved it open, coughing in the billowing smoke. "Hang on," she yelled, voice muffled by the roar of flames. "I'm coming." Inside, the corridor was dimly lit by the inferno that raged overhead. Charred beams crackled, spitting cinders. One glance told her the flames had already spread to the rafters. Time was running out. Orion stood trapped in the locked stall near the end of the aisle, thrashing and kicking at the wooden door. The metal latch had partially warped. Orion, Callie choked, pressing the collar of her pajama top against her mouth in a makeshift filter. Her eyes burned from the smoke. She reached the stall gate, fumbling with the latch that had bent under the heat. With trembling hands, she heaved on it until the lock gave way. Orion burst out, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with terror. For a split second, Callie thought he would bolt and trample her in his panic, but instead he bumped her shoulder as if to confirm she was there, then swung his head to the far corner of the stable. Her gaze followed and landed on a dusty leather saddlebag, hung on a peg in the back corner. She recognized it instantly. Her father. She had left it there after discovering Orion's old therapy records. That bag contained not only Daniel Morgan's notes and letters, but also a wildlife camera they'd placed earlier to document Orion's behavior. She realized, with a lurch of dread, that losing those items would mean losing vital evidence of Orion's story. And she feared other crucial data they'd not yet examined. Orion brayed, biting at the bag's strap, as if urging her to help retrieve it. Smoke churned overhead, and Aim groaned ominously. "We have to go," she coughed. But Orion refused to budge. Determined to yank the strap free, summoning her last shred of courage, Callie dashed forward, seized the end of the bag's belt and tugged. Together, girl and horse dragged it away from the wall. At that moment, a flaming rafter collapsed near them, sending sparks raining down. Callie cried out as the heat seared her bare arms. The stable door was now behind a partial blockade of fallen debris, but there was still a gap. Clinging to the saddlebag, she motioned Orion forward. They lunged through the swirling embers, her vision tunneling as black smoke filled her lungs. Staggering outside, she felt the cool night air strike her tear-streaked face. She coughed, doubling over, her knees hitting the ground. Orion stumbled out beside her, foam at his mouth, coughing and ragged gasps. Another thunderous crash came from behind them. Part of the stable roof gave way, unleashing a fresh surge of flames into the night sky. Callie tried to speak but could only wheeze. She reached out for Orion, still clutching the saddlebag. Her body rebelled against the lack of oxygen, and the world tilted. The last thing she saw was Orion stepping in front of her as the heat pressed in. Then darkness swallowed her consciousness. By the time Laura raced out with neighbors who had responded to her frantic calls, the stable was beyond saving. Fire trucks arrived, sirens wailing, and began hosing down the blaze to stop it from spreading to the house. They found Callie lying unconscious in the grass, her clothes singed, arms reddened from minor burns. Orion stood over her, breathing in shallow heaves, clearly in shock from his injuries. "Callie," Laura screamed, falling to her knees beside her daughter. One of the neighbors gently carried the girl out of harm's way while paramedics rushed in to administer oxygen. Another neighbor tried to calm Orion, who looked on the verge of collapse, muzzle foamy, legs trembling. A separate emergency call went out to Dr. Croft, the local veterinarian. Within minutes, she arrived with a horse trailer. Under the swirl of red and blue lights, they coaxed Orion into the trailer as carefully as possible. His coat was scorched in places, and when he tried to take a step, his muscles shook violently. In the chaos, no one immediately noticed the battered saddlebag half hidden under Callie's limp arm. Later, as paramedics loaded Callie into the ambulance, someone pried it free to make sure she wasn't further injured by the straps. The bag was carried inside the house for safekeeping. Though most people assumed it was just some old gear, hours seemed to blur as the ambulance sped off. Laura sat with Callie, holding her daughter's hand while paramedics administered oxygen and checked for signs of smoke inhalation. The next update they received was that Orion had been taken to the nearest veterinary emergency clinic, where Dr. Croft was fighting to stabilize him. The outlook was grim. Possible respiratory damage, severe shock, signs of repeated seizures. "Stay with me, baby," Laura whispered to Callie in the ambulance, voice quivering. "Stay with Orion, don't let go." Callie regained consciousness in a hospital bed a few hours later. Her throat felt raw, and her chest ached each time she tried to breathe. Laura sat nearby, eyes puffy, relief flooding her expression as Callie stirred. "Mom," Callie croaked. "Orion," Laura's face grew somber. "He's alive? Barely. Dr. Croft is doing everything she can." She paused, then carefully lifted the worn saddlebag onto the bed. "They found this under your arm." There was a camera inside. "A camera?" Confusion laced Callie's voice. Then memory dawned. The wildlife camera that Ruth had secretly set up to watch for suspicious activity around the stable. "Did it record the fire?" Laura nodded gravely. "I looked through. There's footage of 2 men approaching the stable last night." Her voice trembled with anger. "One man in particular is wearing a jacket I recognized from somewhere, but I couldn't place it until I saw his face." She shot Callie a sorrowful look. "It's Dr. Conrad Vale." Callie's eyes widened. "What?" Gathering herself, Laura explained that the camera had been triggered around midnight by movement near the stable. The footage showed a tall, silver-haired man walking with another figure, who carried a gas can. They splashed liquid around the perimeter of the stable, then ignited it. The light briefly illuminated the older man's face, and it was unmistakably Dr. Vale. They fled moments before the flames took hold, heart pounding. Callie stared at her mother in shock. "Why would he?" Before she could finish, the door opened, revealing Sheriff Avery. He stepped in, removing his hat with a look of grim resolve. "Mrs. Morgan, Callie," he greeted quietly. "I've seen the footage. We ran the plate on Vale's SUV. Turns out he's not Dr. Conrad Vale from Equicare. His real name is Conrad Wallenstein, and Equicare's never heard of him. Sheriff Avery explained that Wallenstein was the head of Equinexus Corp., a private research lab that had previously partnered with Rising Dawn to develop gene therapies for equine neurological conditions. Their ultimate goal was to produce a line of Mustangs with heightened pre-seizure detection abilities, which they could then exploit in more advanced and possibly unethical trials. Orion, it turned out, was considered a perfect responder in the early phases of their experiment. But after Rising Dawn collapsed, Equinexus lost track of him. When news articles surfaced about a black Mustang with remarkable therapy instincts, Wallenstein realized it had to be Orion. Under the guise of Equicare, he tried to repurchase the horse quietly. Failing that, he resorted to arson to either force them into relinquishing Orion or to destroy any evidence that linked the horse and his own illegal research activities. Laura listened, rage boiling in her veins. He wanted to kill my daughter and Orion just to hide his agenda. Avery nodded. We have enough proof to charge him. The camera footage is undeniable. He won't get near you again. He glanced sympathetically at Callie's bandaged arms. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I promise we'll bring him to justice. Tears slipped down Callie's cheeks, partly from relief, partly from the guilt that she hadn't realized how dangerous Vale truly was. I just want Orion to be okay, she whispered. The sheriff placed his hat back on. That's up to the vets and the big man upstairs. But as far as I'm concerned, you've done everything you could. Oh, Callie was discharged from the hospital a few days later. Bandages covering minor burns but no lasting damage beyond the trauma of nearly losing Orion. She arrived home to find the stable reduced to blackened rubble, still under investigation. It pained her to see the charred remains of what once was a piece of her father's legacy. Yet the community rallied. Kind neighbors who had once been skeptical of a horse with neurological quirks now lined the driveway with casseroles, fresh hay donations, and well wishes. Local news outlets continued covering the story. Mustang hero in critical condition after arson. Read one headline, accompanied by a photograph of Orion during the festival with Elijah. Meanwhile, at the veterinary clinic, Dr. Croft fought around the clock to stabilize Orion. She administered IV fluids to combat shock, treated his burns, and carefully monitored his frequent seizures, which had intensified from the smoke damage. Each day, she called to update Callie. He's still fighting, she'd say, breathing a little better now. The day finally came when Dr. Croft reported improvement. He's a warrior, she told Callie over the phone. The crisis has passed. He's going to make it. Relief washed over the Morgans like a cleansing tide. The entire community rejoiced, flooding social media with messages of support. About a week after the fire, 2 official representatives from the actual Equicare Foundation arrived at the ranch, their credentials properly displayed. They apologized profusely for the confusion and distress Wallenstein had caused, clarifying that Equicare had no connection to him or Equinexus. We were horrified to learn he was using our name, said Ms. Wilson, the foundation's lead coordinator, shaking Laura's hand. We want to help any way we can, both legally and financially. They offered 3 major forms of support. 1, rebuilding the stable. Equicare pledged to fund the construction of a new therapy facility, ensuring it met modern standards for both horse welfare and visitor comfort. 2, lifetime veterinary coverage. Orion would have comprehensive insurance, covering both routine care and any special treatments he might require for his ongoing neurological condition. 3, development of a community-based Mustang therapy model. They invited Callie to collaborate with them, sharing her father's methods alongside her own experiences to create a more inclusive approach to equine therapy. When they handed her a packet of legal documents, also guaranteeing protection against any future claims by Equinexus, Callie felt tears well in her eyes. Thank you, she murmured, voice trembling. All I ever wanted was to keep Orion safe. Word spread quickly, and soon half the town had volunteered to help raise the new stable. Trucks rumbled in with lumber, nails, and tools. Neighbors who had once viewed the Morgan Ranch as a relic of past glory now came together with a renewed sense of purpose. Some hammered boards in place, others painted bright designs for the future therapy rooms. Children sang or played music while they watched adults working. excited by the idea that Orion would have a brand new home. Callie, though still recovering, assisted where she could. She oversaw the stable layout where the feeding troughs and tack room should go. How many stalls might be needed if they expanded to help more Mustangs in the future? They decided to name the facility Morgan Hope Center in honor of Callie's father, Daniel Morgan, and the hope Orion had ignited in the community. On the day of the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a wooden sign, lovingly carved by one of the old ranchers, was unveiled at the entrance. It read, "Morgan Hope Center, where the impossible becomes possible." Dozens gathered, from local families to out-of-town supporters who had followed the story on social media, as cameras clicked and phone screens recorded. Callie stepped up to the makeshift podium. "I used to think we were alone in this fight," she began, her voice shaky but determined. "But Orion showed me that every creature, every person deserves a chance to be understood and loved. He didn't just rescue children, he rescues me every day, simply by being who he is." Applause thundered across the yard. Tears shone on many faces, for they all knew the cost that had nearly taken Orion from them. But there he stood, a proud black Mustang with faint scars along his flanks, as if wearing the reminders of adversity like badges of honor. Though Orion still faced periodic seizures, Dr. Croft's treatments and careful medication helped regulate them to a manageable frequency. Over time, he recovered enough to walk steadily, even canter gently. Callie noticed that he seemed more attuned than ever. If a child approached him in tears, Orion would press his muzzle gently to the child's shoulder, or move to stand between them and whatever was causing distress. Elijah, the boy who once panicked at loud noises, became one of Orion's most frequent visitors. No longer the trembling figure from the festival, Elijah had learned to trust Orion's calm presence. Each weekend, the child would run into the new stable yard, greet Callie with a big grin, and hurry to stroke Orion's neck. To see Elijah's laughter echo in the airy hall of the Morgan Hope Center was a testament to the resilience that Orion had helped unlock. "Every time I see them together," Laura confided to Ruth, "I'm reminded that love, real, patient love, can conquer things we once thought impossible." Journalists came to interview them about this revolutionary therapy approach, a painting of vivid picture of a small ranch that had defied the odds. One headline read, "A Mustang's second chance sparks a community's new beginning." For Callie, it was enough to watch children hugging Orion's sturdy frame, the horse's gentle breath ruffling their hair, his eyes reflecting a quiet acceptance of his new role. A mild autumn afternoon found Callie leaning against the trunk of the old maple tree her father had once planted. Its red-orange leaves fluttered in the breeze, a soft reminder of time's passage. Orion lay comfortably on the grass beside her, muzzle resting on folded legs. The scar along his side was still visible, but it no longer symbolized tragedy. It stood for survival. Slowly, Callie reached out and touched that scar, a gentle gesture of remembrance. "Dad always said that what others cast aside sometimes turns out to be the most precious of all," she murmured. She glanced at Orion's dark, patient gaze. He was right, wasn't he? Orion made a low, soft sound, almost like a sigh of agreement. In that serene moment, the entire journey played through Callie's mind. The desperate auction, the slow steps to rebuild Orion's trust, the near destruction of everything they cared about. And now this peaceful rebirth. A hush fell, as if the ranch itself were breathing in gratitude. And so, from an abandoned, half-starved Mustang once destined for oblivion, Orion had risen to become a symbol of healing and perseverance, a living testament to how understanding, compassion, and unwavering love could mend even the deepest wounds in horse and human alike. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us. Dr. Kira leaned over the stable railing, watching silently. "The trauma runs deep," she murmured. "But maybe, just maybe, she can reach him." Araya Wren stood by Ashmane's side, her hand barely reaching his mane. "You don't have to be strong alone," she whispered. "I'm here now." Dr. Kira leaned over the stable railing, watching silently. "The trauma runs deep," she murmured. "But maybe, just maybe, she can reach him." The townspeople came not to see a spectacle, but a miracle. The slow healing of two broken hearts finding courage in each other. The townspeople came not to see a spectacle, but a miracle. The slow healing of two broken hearts finding courage in each other.